Should Christians care about creation? God set us as stewards over creation. From the very beginning, that was our charge. When God sent us out of the Garden of Eden, God invited us to go into the world, creating gardens, creating order, learning to live gently with the world that God had made, learning to remember who it belonged to and our role as creatures in another creator's garden. I think it's very clear from the beginning that we are expected to care for what God has placed us, where God has placed us. And I think you see God caring for us in the person of Christ. And if we will follow Christ's example as God cares for us, we will care for one another and we will care for all the other creatures that God has made as well.
I believe that God made all things seen and unseen. And for that reason, I think that a God with intent and love would have made all those things worth knowing, both knowing about and knowing in terms of creating a relationship with. And so, how could I not wish to see the thing that my beloved has made?
We have a mandate from God to care for creation. In the creation stories in Genesis, human beings were given dominion over all of the created beings. Dominion implies responsible stewardship, not mindless domination. So I believe there is a biblical charge for human beings to care for creation from the get-go.
I think that's the value of the two stories in Genesis and what follows. Our understanding as Christians is that God has created all that is. The first story in Genesis says that at the end of each day of creation, each segment of creation, God says this is good. And when the creation is complete at the end of the week, God says this is very good. The whole of it is very good. And the story says that God sets human beings in this garden to care for what has been created as stewards. The word that's usually translated into English comes as dominion, to have dominion over creation. It doesn't mean being a despot. It doesn't mean being a tyrant, using everything that is present there for selfish ends. Dominion comes from the word for house. Dominion, in the best biblical understanding, means the work of housekeeping and husbanding, caring for the whole system, because without adequate care, it will not support that which it is meant to support.
Well, it goes back to some of the stewardship ideas that come out of Genesis, that we are stewards of creation, but I sometimes struggle with that idea because it makes humans at the very center of the conversation, that we are the most important in God's eyes. I think that the idea that God loves everything is part of the idea that we are called to love in response. And so caring for creation, for the trees and for the squirrels and for the birds and all that exists, is loving God by loving everything that God loves. We talk about loving our neighbor as ourselves in Christianity, and it's a key to our theology, a key to how we live. And if we love only the human neighbors, I think we lose the essence of God's love. Loving all that's been created is part of who we are. And so caring for creation is just an extension of that.
I look to 1 Corinthians and the idea of a love that does not demand, and aspire to that type of love, not just for humans, but for plants and even bacteria, as difficult as that is, and I don't think that's easy, but I have this hope for a love that pervades all things.
Nowadays, we cannot be truly in a right relationship with God if we do not have a right relationship with the creation that God, out of God's love, has caused to happen.
And so that we are not a singular entity. We can never think of ourselves as totally independent, but the relationship is one of love and care for all of creation and all that exists.